Hello and welcome to another lesson brought during lockdown in Scotland. This lesson is for the East Kilbride congregation in South Lanarkshire. It's for Sunday, the 14th of March, 2021. But before we get into the text we want to look at, let's share a bit of good news. I think we all need good news at times. If you were listening to the statement that our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, made in the Scottish Parliament on Tuesday, she talked about the resuming of in-person worship. We are still worshiping. We're just worshiping in our own homes using what virtual methods that we have. So she said that in-person worship can resume from the 28th of March. Now, this is a week earlier than she had originally stated. And so that is indeed good news. Now, keep in mind that, and also we're going to be able to have 50 at worship. So that affects things as well, rather than just the 20 as was anticipated when we go back. This is reflecting that things are going very well in Scotland just now. We hope that this continues. We need to emphasize, though, we are still in the grips of the pandemic. So the same rules as there was before will still apply. We will have to observe social distancing, and we'll be setting the chairs back out according to the 2-meter rule that we have. So that we 2 meters, 2 meters, yes, rule that we have. So we'll have to maintain social distancing. We've got to wear face coverings when we're inside. Also, no singing yet. We will continue singing in British Sign Language. That doesn't require the voice, and therefore there's no virus that can escape that direction. There can be no physical contact. So no hugging, no shaking of hands, nothing right now. We can talk to each other at least, but no physical contact. And don't forget the frequent hand washing, and there will be hand sanitizers set out throughout the building. One thing we need to remember is that the virus is still here. It has not disappeared. Because we're going to be allowed up to 50 at worship, this means that this will also be the day of our merger with the Westmains congregation, where the two congregations become one. So we look forward to going forward from 2 weeks from now with a changed congregation and a larger congregation. Now, I've already heard from some who were in the shielded category, some of our older Christians, and they said that they're going to choose to wait until probably closer to May before they return to worship. They want to have both doses of their vaccine, and that, I think, is understandable. Good news for us is that Arlene and I will get our vaccines on Monday, the 15th of March. So we're very happy that that's come through. And one more thing before we get into our lesson. Let me wish all mothers a happy Mothering Sunday. This is my daughter-in-law, Christina, and her 2 children, my grandchildren, Jay in the middle there, who we've yet to meet, and Piper, who we do know. Many today, we realize, are without their mother, but they're still worth remembering today, aren't they? This is the first year without my mother. Although Mother's Day for her would be in May because she lived in the United States. I learned a long time ago to purchase a Mother's Day card in March when Mother's Day is over here, so I could send it to her for May, because I couldn't ever find one in the shops in May. So that never did work. So, of course, we've done them virtually in the last few years. But being Mothering Sunday, I thought it would be good to center our lesson on a mother in the Bible. So I'm sort of going to do that. But I also wanted to stay within the book of James. So I had planned to do a lesson on Rahab. So this seemed like a good place to bring that text in. So as you know, I've skipped large sections of chapter 2. Never fear, we will get to them. I think looking at Rahab should be useful to us. She initially was not a follower of God, but she became a follower of God. She made a great change in her life, making her an example worth emulating. Now, you might be thinking, we don't know much about her, and you would be absolutely correct. But what we do know should prove to be useful for us as we think about living different lives in a world surrounded by people who don't acknowledge God. So, let's get into our text. James 2 verse 25, just taking out one little phrase in that text, she's referred to as Rahab the prostitute. Now, we first meet Rahab back in Joshua chapter 2. And what's going on in Joshua 2 is that the Israelites were camped across the Jordan from Jericho. Joshua sent 2 spies into the city of Jericho to find out what you can about the land, and especially Jericho. They are about to enter the promised land, the land that God had promised them. So these 2 spies went into the city of Jericho, and they stayed at the house of a prostitute named Rahab and spent the night there. A prostitute. Why? There's lots of whys there, aren't there? Why is Rahab known as a prostitute? I ask this question because there are some today who aren't comfortable with her being known as a prostitute. And it also raises questions as to why the 2 spies went to her house. Did Rahab run a hotel? And that's been suggested in recent years. A place of entertainment and talking, which would have been ideal for the spies. Some scholars have suggested that term prostitute simply meant a woman living with no male supporter. So was she by this stage maybe even a former prostitute, as we see her drying flax on her roof? She could have been gainfully employed in the weaving industry. And we can weave all sorts of scenarios and try to make her out to be something other than what the text here says. But what we need to do is look up the words that are used. So I went to my Hebrew word studies and discovered in Hebrew the term for prostitute here is zaonal. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it means a prostitute of some type. And I looked up the Greek word for prostitute here in James 2:25. It's the word porneia. Now you should recognize that word, the word porne. That's where we get the word pornography. This is a woman who sells her body for sexual uses. So it seems to me that she could have been a prostitute, and she definitely was, according to the text. She may have been working a trade as well. That's not unthinkable. I've heard it suggested that she was not only a prostitute, but her home was, in essence, a brothel, which, by the way, would have been an ideal place for the spies to not only be able to talk to people, to get a feel for what's going on, but also to get lost in the city. And that may have been what happened. Well, to wrap up Joshua 2, she hid the spies and helped them to escape in exchange for a promise that she and her family would be spared the coming destruction. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself by a little bit there, because we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I have visited Jericho twice. So I want to have just a quick look at Jericho and what we know about it. This is a photo of a relief map that I have of modern Israel. And if you look close, you can see Jericho there. It's circled there on your map. So Jericho is just there. It's at the time it would have been on the flat part, so it's in the valley there, in between the hills on the left and on the right. I like these relief maps because they show you what it really, really is like there. Israel, by the way, would have been camped on the other side of the Jordan River. And again, you can see it's flat there. They've already descended from the plains on top of the hills to the right there of this map. So they're camped there. Jericho's here. Jericho at this time was not large by modern standards. It is, I believe, the mound you see in the middle of this picture. Let me say before we begin to examine this a little, that when you visit this site, they will tell you that this is not the Jericho of Joshua's time, that it dates from an earlier time. It does have parts that do date earlier, there's no doubt about that. But after researching this, I have come to the conclusion that it must be the one from the book of Joshua. This is largely based on the excavations of the graves that are found with goods that date from the late 1400s BC. If this is actually an earlier site, as modern scholarship would have us believe, how did these later objects get in these graves? Doesn't make sense, does it? And there's also evidence of the walls falling outward. So let's explore this just a little bit further. By the way, the site is 40,000 square meters, or 430,000 square feet. That's about 660 feet on a side. So that has 4 sides, and it sort of does, or 2 sides, or whatever. It's not all that far around it. I know I walked the entire top of that you can see there in a matter of about 10 minutes, taking photographs. Jericho in the time of Joshua was surrounded by a massive stone wall. In fact, we know now it was a double wall. It's over 3.6 meters high. That's over 12 foot high, and 1.8 meters wide at the base. That's 5 foot 11 inches, almost 6 foot wide at the base. So this is, of course, all has been demolished and fallen down, and sediment has settled in on it. When they first began the excavation of this site, the central part of the site, which is where you see here, was the first thing that Kathleen Kenyon excavated. And this is the earliest part of the city. It consists of a wall, which you can see in the back of the photograph here, and a stone tower, which you can see the base of here on the right. And you can still go down into it. Well, we can't, but they could when they excavated. You can see they put a grill over it to keep people and things out. Not that you can go down into that section anyway. But the Tower of Jericho, from what we can understand, from what we know from the archaeology, was an 8.5 meter tall structure that's 28 foot tall, made of stones, as you can see here, and is among the earliest stone monuments of humanity. There are walls you can find with obvious fallen bricks, as you can see here in this photograph, although the date they give this wall, and I do believe it is a bit too early for Joshua's date, is somewhere between 2700 and 2350 BC. So this may even predate Abraham's arrival in this area by just a little bit. There are more ancient walls that have been uncovered. There were quite a few walls. You can see holes in here. Maybe those were windows. Who knows what was going on there. But this is in the central area of the site still. So it's an early wall. But we can find loads of evidence of habitation here in Jericho. As Jericho grew and expanded, more houses were built further out. These here are built between the 2 walls, which I do believe were there at the time of Joshua. You can see evidence of the wall nearest to the bottom of the picture, and then a wall you can just see at the far end of the picture there. And there were houses built in between them. Who knows, one of these very well could have been Rahab's. They date these houses to 1800 to 1650 BC, so they're still dating them a little bit outside of the time of Joshua, which would be about 1400 BC, but very well could fall within that range as well. And here's another wall looking at the wall, the inner wall from the other side. This is called a cyclopean wall, which denotes the type of ancient masonry made with massive irregular blocks. This one, they say, dates from 1650 to 1550, so we're getting closer to the time of Joshua. As I mentioned, there was a double wall. And as impressive as these are, they were not that stable. This could be some of the walls that fell when God destroyed Jericho. The walls fell down. That very well could be. And by the way, being unstable walls means they would fall easily. But we have found also, the archaeologists have uncovered all sorts of things, such as these storage vats. I think they were probably for grain, as well as mortars and various household implements. This is Jericho. Jericho of the time of Rahab. But let's continue with Rahab in verse 25. And similarly, was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another way? We find Rahab had faith. In fact, we read about that. She's justified by what she did, but she was a woman of faith as well. See that in Joshua chapter 2. I'm going to begin reading at verse 8 so we can get sort of the background here. Now, before the spies went to sleep, that's after the spies are already in the area, Rahab went up to the roof. She said to the men, I know the Lord is handing this land over to you. We are absolutely terrified of you, and all who live in the land are cringing before you. For we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you left Egypt, and how you annihilated the two Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of the Jordan. When we heard the news, we lost our courage, and no one could even breathe for fear of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. So now promise me this with an oath sworn in the Lord's name. Because I have shown allegiance to you, show allegiance to my family. Give me a solemn pledge that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and will rescue us from death. One thing we see here is Rahab had faith. How had she come by her faith in God? Observation and hearing, I would suggest. The news of what was happening, what Israel was doing, preceded their arrival in the land. If you remember a year ago, we were hearing news of the coronavirus. We were just about to go into lockdown. We'd already had the first case diagnosed in Scotland. And the first death, I think, has already occurred by this point in Scotland. And we heard that news. They heard the news of this Israelite nation coming towards them. So she has developed a faith in God. Interesting, in the text, you'll notice that Lord is, in the text in Joshua, is in all caps. She's referring to him as Yahweh. She's come to believe in God as being the one who is God in heaven above and on earth below. But it wasn't just a mental belief. We'll talk about that probably in our next lesson. But she did something, and that's what the point James is making here. What she did, her works, showed that she had faith. Let's continue in Joshua chapter 2, verse 14. The men said to her, if you die, may we die too. If you do not report what we've been up to, then we will show unswerving allegiance to you when the Lord hands the land over to us. Then Rahab let them down by a rope through the window. Her house was built as part of the city wall. She lived in the wall. It leads me to the impression that she lived in that area of the double wall. She told them, head to the hill country so the ones chasing you don't find you. Hide from them there for 3 days, long enough for those chasing you to return. Then you can be on your way. The men said to her, we are not bound by this oath you made us swear unless the following conditions are met. When we invade the land, tie this red rope in the window through which you let us down, and gather together in your house your father, mother, brothers, and all who live in your father's house. Anyone who leaves your house will be responsible for his own death. We're innocent in that case. But if anyone with you in the house is harmed, we will be responsible. If you should report what we've been up to, we are not bound by this oath you made us swear. She said, I agree to these conditions. She sent them on their way, and then she tied the red rope in the window. The picture, by the way, here is from the top of the mound of Jericho, and you can see how close the hills were to her. And so she's very, very near them there. One thing we can see from Rahab is she didn't just say she believed in God. She showed that she believed in God. She showed that by sending the spies out another way. She showed that by leaving the cord tied in the window. In fact, she showed that by not betraying why they had been there. And she and her family were spared when the city was invaded. This is the result of what happened. She's listed in the Faith Hall of Fame, I think we could call it. Hebrews 11. By faith, Rahab the prostitute escaped the destruction of the disobedient because she welcomed the spies in peace. So, the rest of the story. Here is what happened. From Joshua chapter 6, beginning of verse 20, the ram's horn sounded. This is Israel. They've marched around the city and the horns are sounding. And when the army heard the signal, they gave a loud battle cry. The wall collapsed and the warriors charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. They annihilated with the sword everything that breathed in the city, including men and women, young and old, as well as cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua told the two men who had spied on the land, enter the prostitute's house and bring out the woman and all who belonged to her, as you promised her. So the young spies went and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family, and she took them to a place outside the Israelite camp. But they burned the city and all that was in it, except for the silver, gold, and bronze and iron items they put in the treasury of the Lord's house. Yet Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her. She lives in Israel to this very day because she hid the messengers Joshua sent to spy on Jericho. So she saved her family. She became part of Israel. When Joshua was written, so if it's written by Joshua towards the end of Joshua's life, she's still around, and she's mentioned as being part now of Israel. By the way, those that mentioned there that Jericho was burned, that's what they found in the excavations of Jericho. They found charring as that Jericho had burned. Now, the explanation that they'll give you there on the site is that an earthquake had to have caused the walls to collapse. And by the way, could God not have used an earthquake to collapse the walls? We're not told exactly how he did it. But the burning, we got evidence of that as well. So we know that she saved her family. We know she became part of Israel. If we piece the rest of this together, and this is based entirely on what we find in Matthew's gospel. We know that she married an Israelite. We know what his name was. His name was Salmon. We know that she had a son, and his name was Boaz. We know who Boaz is. Boaz marries Ruth, and they have a son named Obed. And Obed has a son named Jesse, and Jesse has a son named David. So she was the mother of Boaz. If I've got this right, she was the great-great-grandmother of David. So I think that's the way all this works out. And that means she was in the lineage of Jesus the Messiah. This is what we find in Matthew 1, 5, and 6. This is given Jesus' lineage. And as it gets to that part, it mentions Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David the king. And it keeps on going down until you end up with Joseph and Mary and, of course, Jesus. All this by the woman usually known as the prostitute. I think there's some lessons in that for us. One thing we can see is having a bad background does not eliminate our being useful for God. Yes, it looks like she had been a prostitute. But she gave that up. She changed her life to serve God. She was not eliminated. I like Romans 8:28. I like the way the NIV renders it. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Yes, she might have been a prostitute, but God worked for her good because she loved him. And he used her for his purpose, without a doubt. We may do things that we're ashamed of. That does not eliminate God using us in his service. Bad things may happen to us. In fact, I would suggest that coronavirus has not been a great thing to have happened to our society. But can God use this for good? I think absolutely he is using this for good. A lot has changed, and a lot has changed for the good as a result of the coronavirus. Think as well about Rahab's faith. I think there's some lessons in there for us. She believed because of what she had heard. She believed before she met any follower of God. We've met people like that as well in our years. We'll find people who do believe in God, and as a result, they become a follower of God. But it wasn't just belief. Her faith in God caused her to act. Verse 26, James chapter 2. James summarizes that section by saying, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead." You see, it's what we do that shows that we really have faith. Faith without works is dead. What we do shows our faith. Now, of course, conversely, what we don't do shows our lack of faith. So maybe that's a good question for us. Are we showing our faith? Or are we showing that we really don't have faith? And we'll explore this. My plan is we'll do that in our next lesson. Finding a hymn that goes along with this text, this section of James, was a challenge. I think I found one that will work okay. It's not about Rahab specifically, but I think it works fairly well. It's a modern hymn. Help Us, O Lord, to Learn, written by William Watkins Reed. I believe he's a junior as well. He wrote, this was published in 2013. He actually was born in 1923 and died either in 2007 or 2009. I found both dates on the internet. So this was published after he died. He went to Oberlin College and Seminary and Yale Divinity School. He served for more than 50 years in rural and inner city Methodist churches. And he's also served on the executive committee of the Hymn Society of America. So he's very much involved in the writing of hymns. He was involved in social issues, served as a councilman as well as a county commissioner. But from what I read, his hymns are widely used and published in many hymnals. Looked in our two hymnals that we have at East Kilbride, Songs of Faith and Praise for the Lord. We don't have any of the hymns that he has written in any of our books. But here's one that at least it's got really good words, so hopefully that'll be useful to us as we close these thoughts. Help us, O Lord, to learn the truths your word imparts, to study that your laws may be inscribed upon our hearts. Help us, O Lord, to live the faith with which we proclaim, that all our thoughts and words and deeds may glorify your name. Help us, O Lord, to teach the beauty of your ways, that yearning souls may find the Christ and sing aloud his praise. We look forward to meeting in person, recording these lessons in a live worship service in 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to seeing those who are in East Kilbride again very soon. And of course, hopefully this virus, the vaccine rolls out, we'll get to see more and more people in the coming days. We trust you'll have a good day and a good week.